So I thought I would take some time to talk about what's happening in America right now, with the riots and the protests, and before that, the killing of George Floyd and the other race-related news stories in the past couple of weeks, as well as the response to all of those events on the news and on social media, and as far as I can tell, across the country broadly. So I thought I'd talk about that, recognizing that I'm probably not the best person to talk about that. In fact, I'm certainly not at all the best person given my experiences, or lack of experiences in the subject matter in question. But if you're going to address something that's a nationwide issue, everybody needs to engage. And I feel like the black inner city communities have a pretty good grasp on what has been happening within those communities for many decades, if not 400 years. And they have been voicing their concerns about those and protesting them for many, many, many years now. And so I feel like they're pretty much on the same page. And so in order to address it, maybe other people within other communities need to talk to people within those communities. And I can talk to people that I've interacted with, which are certainly mostly not from those communities. In terms of the death itself, a few things come to mind. First is, I wouldn't call it a murder necessarily. It was more of, it might even be worse than that in terms of it's just a callous indifference to human life and kind of the treatment of people as if they're kind of ants that you just, you walk down the sidewalk, you don't have time to look for every ant that you step on. You might kill him, you might not kill him, but you're just indifferent to it. I think you can justify that with ants, but when it's an officer doing that with a person as he's screaming, and then a half a dozen other people, or however many it was, accompanying him, and nobody having any type of problem with it, I think that's much worse than the isolated psychopath, which might, which certainly is in, police departments across the country, given that there's millions of police officers, and some people are serial killers, and some people are like that. What's scary is when other people act like that who shouldn't act like that because they're not like that inherently. And so that suggests a systemic problem. And it's not just this video, it's a lot of the videos, and the videos have only been coming out for a few years because that's when people have had video cameras, but it's certainly been going on like that since the beginning of America. And probably worse so even in the past. It's just there wasn't recordings of it. But even like the recent ones of Laquan McDonald in Chicago, where there's, I forget how many, but at least a dozen police officers there. They shoot him 17 times. He's just in the street, no threat to anybody. But then it's not just the officer that shot him; it's the other dozen people there that sat on the story as well, and nobody had the conscience to say anything about it. And then the entire police department conceals the video for a year. And so that only happens when there's an us versus them type of mentality, a tribalistic attitude towards us being the good guys, the police officers, and them being the bad guys out there. And so we, the good guys, have to defend ourselves against the bad guys. As soon as you, the police officer, or you, the person in general, starts thinking like that, or me, or anybody, starts thinking like that, it's time to reevaluate, because that's the type of tribalism and the type of cult-like mentality that leads to good people taking actions that they would never otherwise take. And so the thin blue line is, people have thin blue line shirts and flags waving about. What does that mean? Does that mean that the cops are the good guys and the people there are the bad guys? The police should be, in theory, enforcing the laws that we democratically decide are necessary for a society. So they should be part of that society, and a necessary part, and even a celebrated part, but a part that's accountable to the interests of the broader public. And when they start viewing themselves as kind of a separate entity from there that's taking on the outside, which is transparently what's happening in at least some of the worst police departments, within the big cities that are having the most protests, then that's when big problems occur. And so that's what I think about that generally. A few things about the protests and the response to them. First is, there's no credible national figure to actually address the nation at this time, and that's become increasingly transparent. So Trump has no credibility, not just with the COVID response, but with this response, the economic response, and mostly just his general demeanor and his reflexive impulse to always take the low road and always point the finger at the other person and never try to unify, and to narcissistically aggrandize himself as never the cause of any problems and always the cause of his own success, and never to kind of look at the bigger picture. And so he's not credible. He's also not credible because he's in the past discriminated racistly in his apartment buildings against black people. He took out a full-page ad in the New York Times against the Central Park Five, who were innocent of the crime that they were convicted of for, I think, well over a decade. And the reason they were convicted is because there was a huge outcry from the white community, from people like that white lady in Central Park who was called the police on the black guy trying to get him killed a few days ago. Those people might hashtag Black Lives Matter on Twitter, and be allies, but as soon as push comes to shove in real life, and there's any type of threat to themselves, there's a kind of an impulse to go down to the least common denominator of their primal urges to otherize. And Trump fed into that, and he always feeds into it. And so in that case, the full-page ad poured fuel on the fires that led to the conviction of those black people, which was a national case that got a lot of attention. But most of these cases don't get any type of attention because the people that are dealt with are powerless. And the reason they got a lot of attention is because it happened to a wealthy white lady in the case of the Central Park Five. But if it happens to a poor black guy or a poor black woman, there's not much attention paid to it, and there's no outrage. And so Trump has no credibility. The Democrats don't have any credibility either, though. Biden has no credibility. He is the one that wrote the crime bill, which led to the spike in mass incarceration in the 80s and 90s, which leads to the U.S. having more people in prison than any other country in the world, including China, despite having a third of the population. So he has no credibility. He also pushed Reagan to increase the drug war in the 80s, which is probably the single biggest impediment or reason that the black communities and poor communities in general continue to be devastated by the state. So he has no credibility. Also, he's not good enough of a politician. He's not coherent enough, and he's not articulate enough to credibly pretend to unify. So he's just doesn't have it in him anymore. Now, Barack Obama did have it in him, but he also, I think, has no credibility either, because even though he was articulate and he could say nice words, and I'm sure a lot of people are wishing that we had Obama to say those words, in reality, he is, in my opinion, what Cornel West called him, which I probably shouldn't call him, but I'll just quote Cornel West, which is a Rockefeller Republican in blackface, meaning that even though he says nice words about it, he was put into place by the very systems and economic interests that put Bill Clinton in place, put Joe Biden in place right now, that have put a nice face with nice words to say about this in front of these things without systemically addressing any of the actual problems. And so that's who Barack Obama was. And it might be even worse because he was a black man, it kind of undermined the actual grievance that was given by the Black Lives Matter started under Obama, but it was kind of loses credibility when everybody says, okay, but the president is black, the attorney general is black, so it's not a black and white issue. That is true, but the reason that they're there is because they integrated themselves into the systems that were there previously without challenging them. So he has no credibility. In terms of the riots and the protests, the peaceful protests are, I think, great. I think that that's what we should be encouraging people to do. But the riots are undermining it, frankly. And it's true that a lot of it is legitimate grievances to the structural inequities and the police brutality and what have you that has been going on for so long. But that doesn't mean that it's helpful, and it also doesn't mean that that's universally the reason that is happening. some of it, frankly, is, you know, white college, upper middle class college students who have watched V for Vendetta a lot of times and listened to Rage Against the Machine and have had a few sociology classes and want to get out there and get their feet wet and make change, and so they just go start smashing buildings. And there's videos of it, and it's happened at other, you know, protests also. It undermined the Occupy Wall Street's protests. You see that bug fly in my mouth? It undermined the World Trade Organization protests in Seattle's back in freaking, you know, the early 2000 or 1999, whenever that was. It happens, you know, and it's not helpful. And I think that people should, instead of encouraging it and justifying it, should get those people out of there, because they're undermining your movement. And it's also just a form of narcissism, and it's a form of, look at me, like I'm gonna go do stuff. If you actually wanted to do stuff, are those the people that are showing up to city council meetings and trying to get different you know, district attorneys elected and actually doing the legwork to make the change, which is hard and it's not sexy, and you can't post it on social media and you can't pat yourself on the back right afterwards because it's the actual organizing that it takes? Did those people go out and, you know, try to actually get people elected or organize, you know, events in the past to actually address us? No, they didn't. They just are here to throw rocks and stuff, and it's not helpful and it's not cool. And just like I was talking about the freaking tribe mentality within the police department and other spots, it's also, you know, happens within left-wing communities, and I think that it should be stopped. Now people are sharing memes and what have you about you know, why riots are justified. Some are more justified than others. If it's legitimate people within the communities that are reacting from a real place, that's one thing. If it's other people from the outside communities acting from a place of you know, I want to, you know, go do something cool, it's something different. But for the most part, they always undermine movements. Now I know people are talking about the Boston Tea Party. That was like 350 years ago, and so if you have to go back that far for your point, then that's kind of the exception that proves the rule. Also, there was a war right after that, and we don't need a war right now. We need actually those people to organize and to do the legwork to actually make change. We're not, you know, it's not the freaking 18th century British occupation. It's a very different circumstance. So that's not helpful. People talked about the Stonewall riots. Now that's true. That did elevate the issue of gay rights to the national conversation. But at that time, there was no gay rights movement. That was just a general frustration because there was no avenues for them at all. There are avenues here if the people that are rioting actually wanted to do that. And so that put it on the collective consciousness. But then the things that led to the actual, you know, passes of gay marriage and legislation for gay people, it wasn't more rioting. In fact, that would have undermined it. What did it was organizing, and what did it was normalizing gay people with shows like freaking Will and Grace and Modern Family and whatever have you. But if it just was a bunch of, if people got the impression that it was a bunch of, you know, gay people just rioted, that really actually wouldn't have helped much. It only helped, the rioting helped people realize that there are gay people and they are people, and it made them pay attention to that. And then it served as a place of, okay, now we can organize from here because all these people just came together for this event. That's not what the case is right now for this either. And so the rioting isn't helpful, and it should be addressed. It is somewhat understandable, but it is multifaceted also. But people need to organize. I mean, I haven't been involved in Black Lives Matter stuff much, but in general, for issues like this, and I've done stuff with issues that are related to it, you can't get people to those events. You can get people to concerts. You can get people to, maybe you get them to smash windows now. You can get them to, you know, sporting events. You can get them to watch PewDiePie. You can get them to do all the mass media stuff, MTV Music Awards, everybody will talk about. But when it comes to the actual legwork of doing stuff, people won't do it. And so that's what should actually be done. And it's good to see that people are engaging, but people need to call out this stuff within their own circles. So that goes for police officers, you know, not freaking, you know, sitting on their hands while they watch their other officers thin blue line a person's life away with their knee on their neck. And it also goes for people in leftist circles, not just adopting what the prevailing orthodoxy is among the woke supporters that really aren't thinking strategically and sometimes are being narcissists too. So that's what I think about it. Yeah, not that anybody listened.